So, did you ever get a word wrong, like mispronounce it consistently, or get confused about how to say it or even what a word means? When that happens, it can be so embarrassing when you suddenly realize you've been saying it wrong, or you misunderstood a term, and then you start thinking, oh my goodness, where are the places that I've said this in public? How embarrassing, right? I can remember when I was coming of age, when I was in high school, I had heard the term, at least I thought I heard the term Rhodes Scholar, and I'd hear, news stories, or somebody would graduate and go off to study, in Europe or in Japan or across the sea somewhere, and they'd be a student in a college somewhere, and I'd hear, oh, they're a Rhodes Scholar, but I was hearing it R-O-A-D, like someone who went on a road to go study somewhere. So for a long, long time, I thought when you talked about a Rhodes Scholar, that's what the term was, I thought, and I used to think it was anybody who traveled, a great distance to go to school somewhere. Only later did I learn, no, it's not R-O-A-D, it's named for a person, it's a family named Rhodes, and that name is attached to a particular scholarship award for particular students who apply for particular things, and if you show certain promise, you can be awarded a Rhodes Scholarship. And yes, that might mean that you go overseas or study somewhere else. But it's not the word road, R-O-A-D. I had it wrong for a long, long time, and it was embarrassing, but the stakes were basically pretty low. Just me and maybe a red-cheeked face embarrassment for a little bit. But the stakes can be huge if we get an idea or a word wrong and build a whole theology around it, build a whole way of thinking around it, and then pass that down one generation to another, say for, 500 years. A lot can go wrong there. For example, this coming Sunday hangs on a really important word that you've probably heard a bunch of times, but we don't often do the deep dive to talk about it. It's the word Messiah, which is a Hebrew word, or the Greek translation, Christ. Here's a quick overview about what we're talking about. So the word Messiah, the word Christ, are just the words for anointed. And anointed literally is like to dab something with oil. So if I get a cut and I put antibiotic ointment on, I'm anointing the cut on my hand, right? In ancient Israel, ointment or anointing isn't just like for medicine when you got a scratch. It's a symbolic thing that somebody who's set apart for a particular role or job is anointed. So a prophet would come along and anoint the person who's going to be the new king, or the new priest would be anointed. They pour oil on their head in this sort of ceremonial ritual moment to say, you're the person, you've been set apart to be the high priest or to be the king, that kind of thing. So again, in ancient Israel, when you hear the word anointed, that's a way of talking about the person chosen for a particular job, usually the king, usually the priest, really big, important jobs. In our culture, we have other symbolic ceremonial moments to talk about the setting apart of people for their jobs, like when a president is elected, there's an inauguration, right? It's not magic, but it's when that ritual happens. The hand on the Bible, they take the oath, everybody watches. That's the moment that this person is set apart and is noted to be selected for the job. We have other moments where people are ritually set apart. Pastors are installed to serve in their congregations, or people are officially hired. There's a handshaking, contract signing ceremony, that kind of thing. In ancient Israel, anointed is a way of talking about the king who's been set apart for the job of being king of ancient Israel or Judah. And that word anointed is basically a royal kind of a term. And in this ancient era, kings are not just figureheads like you might think about in Great Britain today, but they actually would often be the ones leading the charge, or at least planning battle strategy, leading God's people, leading the people of Israel in battle if they were being attacked, that kind of thing. So they're actually putting themselves in harm's way, actually being the ones out there doing the fighting, at least in theory. Kind of like when in our culture we talk about the president as commander-in-chief. Commander-in-chief is really just another title for president, but it sort of emphasizes that, oh, this is the person who commands our military forces. So ancient Israel, king is also the Messiah, the anointed one, and when a new king comes, that one becomes anointed as well. So something happens when ancient Israel and Judah are destroyed by foreign empires. The Assyrians conquer the northern kingdom of Israel. The Babylonians take the southern kingdom of Judah into exile. And for a long time, there's no king at all. And people had this thought, maybe that's done. Maybe no more kings, no more Messiah at all. until there came this hope. The prophets would speak to the people in exile and would say, maybe God will forgive us. Maybe God will start over with us. We haven't earned it. We don't deserve it, maybe. But you know, God's always merciful beyond what we expect or deserve. Maybe God will bring us home, and God will anoint or raise up a leader to help bring us home. And the prophets even then dared to imagine God doesn't just have to pick from our nationality, our people. God could pick, say, a foreign king or a pagan ruler to be the chosen one, anointed one to lead the people back home. So you hear prophets saying things like, hey, that pagan king Cyrus, he's going to come and eventually conquer the Babylonians and set us free. Or somebody else could come and be God's anointed one. And there came to be this hope, maybe, just maybe, when we come home from exile, God will raise up a new king and things will be right again. Things will be good and true and righteous. God will set up a good and faithful and just anointed one, chosen one, to be our leader, to be our king, our sovereign. For hundreds of years, that hope is nurtured and held on to. It's what gave people the hope that maybe one empire after another wouldn't be the end of the story, because after the Babylonians, it was the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. It's this long, unending line of one domination system after another. And the people of Judah slowly hold on to this idea, maybe God will send somebody who can be God's anointed and will finally set things right. Now, because in most of their past experience, those anointed ones had been military leaders and kings, the assumption was, well, when God sends a Messiah again, God's Messiah is going to be like a new King David or a new King Solomon, you know, somebody commanding armies and conquering, or amassing vast wealth, somebody with power and money and wealth and prestige, that kind of thing. So the assumption was one day, God will send somebody who will be like the good old days and make it like it used to be, and will get rid of those Romans or whoever the empire of the day is, with raising up armies and killing our enemies and conquering all the people who are our threats, and finally restoring justice, and maybe finally giving us the right set of rules to follow so that we won't go into exile anymore. There were all these hopes pinned onto the word Messiah, so that if you asked somebody on the street corner in, say, ancient Jerusalem, what is the Messiah like, or what will it be like when Messiah comes, you might get a variety of answers, like, oh, he'll be a king, he'll be a general, he'll be a lawgiver like Moses, but basically somebody who will amass power and wealth and maybe military might, or all those together, to get rid of our enemies, to destroy the people that we don't like anymore, and finally to rule forever. That's what everybody thinks when they hear Messiah in the first century, if they have a hope about a Messiah. Some people had just given up on that hope altogether. So anyway, all that's in the background has been simmering and stewing for like hundreds of years, and Jesus comes on the scene. And Jesus does some amazing things. He heals people. He has a way of casting out evil spirits. He does things that defy explanation, walking on water, turning water into wine, raising the dead. And he talks and speaks with authority like he really knows what he's talking about God. But on the other hand, he doesn't seem all that impressive by other accounts, because he's, he's constantly homeless and wandering from place to place. And he talks about God blessing the nobodies and the poor and the outcasts. He seems to not care so much about the strict adherence to the law like the Pharisees tend to be, or he doesn't seem interested in the temple and ritual sacrifice like the Sadducees seem to be. He's not at all interested in raising up an army like the Zealots seem to be. Nobody can quite figure him out, and he certainly doesn't look like somebody who's aspiring to conquer the world or raise up an army. So one day Jesus gathers his disciples, his close inner circle of students around him, and they basically treated him like a rabbi, like somebody who can talk to them about the meaning of living God's way, but nobody with like political aspirations. And Jesus looks at them, and using a title he often uses for himself, Son of Man, or like truly human one, he goes, what do you hear other people say, the Son of Man? He's pointing to himself. Who is the Son of Man? And some people go, well, some people think you're like one of the prophets. Some people think you're like John the Baptizer. And then Jesus asks them, who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter, God bless him, blurts out, you're the Messiah. And Jesus goes, yes, okay, you're right. And Peter, I got to give God credit, because this is the one you didn't come up with on your own. This had to have come from God, because I don't look the part. Yes, the one you've been hoping for, that's me. But then immediately he tells Peter and the rest of the disciples, don't tell anybody I'm the Messiah. And this is the thing that befuddles Christians and has befuddled biblical scholars for centuries. Because which is it, Jesus? Are you the Messiah? Or if so, why are you telling them not to tell anybody? And I think it has everything to do with what we assume that word means. And it's like me as a kid thinking the word was road scholar instead of Rhodes scholar. Over centuries, people had heard the word anointed, chosen, Messiah, or in Greek, Christ, and assumed, when Messiah comes, that necessarily means military force, raising up an army, gonna make himself king, gonna start a new empire, gonna take back his nation for God, that kind of thing. And Jesus makes it clear that is not at all what he's come for. That he's not come to conquer, but to liberate people. He's come not to destroy his enemies, but to die for them and pray for their forgiveness as he dies. He's come not to be the one with the hammer crucifying his enemies, but the one who gets crucified and who redeems not only his people, but the whole world in that act of self-giving, suffering love. He is still indeed God's chosen one, God's anointed one. But everybody had been hearing that word wrong for literally centuries. They assumed anointed, Messiah, meant military hero, conquering warrior king, that kind of thing. And instead Jesus says, I'm God's anointed, but that doesn't mean what you think it means. You've been using that word wrong. You've been mishearing it now for too long and building your whole theology around it. For us now, 2,000 years later, it is so easy, even though we've got this Bible story, to still mishear it and to think Jesus has come to be some nationalistic ruler, to be some kind of a builder of empires, or that he wants us as his followers to build nations and empires and use the means of military might and political power to accomplish God's means. When Jesus instead is convinced it's the path of self-giving love, it's the way of the cross, that is exactly how God's reign comes. And not like every empire of past history that has to conquer somebody, destroy somebody, or set up emperors or kings or thrones. God's way of reigning is just plain different. And the conversation we're going to have this coming Sunday is to unpack, what does it mean to live in light of that difference? Can we admit, I've been misunderstanding all this time? Can we rediscover the joy of being wrong, maybe? That's the conversation we're having this coming Sunday, and we invite you to be a part of it.